Okay. I figured out how to do this. I feel smart. Hi, for everybody in here in the recording later. My name is Anna. I go by Short Round online, and I am a... Hey, hey, Bri. And I am an archaeological illustrator. I specialize in lithics, and I am a amateur flintknapper as well. And today I just wanted to do a really casual stream, and this will be available on YouTube later. But I just wanted to do a really casual stream on archaeological illustration for those who are interested in getting into it, particularly for lithics, and sort of tips and tricks that I've come across along the way. Very basics on, extreme basics on lithic illustration, or lithic analysis, and some bits and bobs on flintknapping too. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I want to show. This might be a series, considering there are some things that I technologically can't show today. For instance, petroglyph illustration, that's all on the computer, and I don't know how to go back and forth between showing my computer monitor to this, so I might do something later on petroglyph illustration, and if I don't have time to get into it today, I might do a draw along with folks if people are interested in that sort of thing. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about archaeological illustration. It's a huge part of what I do in my work in the last 5 years doing archaeology. So yeah, one disclaimer I have to say, since this is Twitch, I know my audience will be primarily composed of archaeologists, but everything you're going to see today, with the exception of stuff within this bag and this guy, everything else was sourced by myself and was flintnapped by myself, created by myself. These were teaching materials donated to universities by people who meant well, but they're doing things that you shouldn't. Basically, if you find an artifact in the field, don't take it. That's what it boils down to. These are artifacts that completely lost their provenience, meaning that we were losing the context of these tools, these materials. We don't know where they come from. We don't know what culture they belong to. And if you find something in the field, if you're in a park or something like that, if you're in a federal park, contact the BLM, contact those running the park, and let them know that an archaeologist should come by and look at something. Yeah, no touchy. Take a picture and leave it be, exactly. And if you're not in a park, if you're in a private property, even your own, something that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned for sure is that a lot of states have an archaeological association within that state. And I know that for me, being a Washington archaeologist, I belong to the Association for Washington Archaeology. I actually sit on the board of directors for that association. And a lot of the times, we get emails from people with pictures of artifacts that they find on their property, and they're saying, like, I'm reaching out to you guys. I don't know what this is. If one of you guys could come out and take a look at that, this would be great. And that's, one of the primary functions of archaeological associations too. So if you've got one of those in your state, it's really easy to find that out. And if you find something, contact those folks. They're great. They'll help you out. Doesn't cost anything. Just tip an archaeologist off about something and let them handle it. But all to say, none of this is to encourage people to collect these sorts of things. If you make them your own, if you source them yourself, and if you make them your own, that's completely fine. But going to pawn shops and purchasing this sort of thing, or going out and collecting it yourself, that is not what we're all about here. But before I start, I'm hoping that there's music playing. If someone could let me know, that'd be great. I spent 2 hours trying to find something that was DMC friendly. And I'm okay, good. Yay! Let there be music. So, let me get all this stuff out of the way. I'm so happy to have music. I just, oh. So I'm gonna start with, I think I'll start with this. So a huge portion of what I do is, oh, hi Bill, I'm glad you could make it. But a huge portion of what I do is basically accounting for missing illustrations of tools and projectile points and flakes. I'm gonna try, heads up, I'm gonna try to use as friendly of language as possible given the nature of the site and that it's not entirely full of archaeologists. So, flakes and projectile points, arrowheads, spearheads, that sort of thing. If field techs find this sort of thing out in the field and they don't, they don't collect it, it's not taken with them, and they don't get as good of an illustration themselves, or they forget to do an illustration, forget to fill out that form. A huge part of my job was to take pictures and basically provide the illustration for them as if they did it. And this is the kinds of stuff that I would do. I'd get, the one side of the tool, another side of the tool, and then hopefully the side view as well. Sometimes I'd have to do some guesswork on that, or sometimes I'd leave it blank entirely. But this is the sort of stuff that I would do. I don't have the best webcam, I'm sorry, but hopefully you can kind of see. And yeah, this was a book that I was trying to put together for field techs to kind of show the illustration differences between different typologies and give them a kind of sort of a guide to go off of if they wanted to do this sort of thing themselves rather than take pictures and hope to God I've got time to do it. But yeah, thank you. But for instance, these two are both side notches. They're different though. They're both primarily, my CRM covered Washington and Oregon, so these were found in Oregon. I can show the originals up there. But these are both side notches, and this is why it's so important to illustrate the differences and to really, illuminate. There's the reason we do illustration work is because Obsidian in particular, but a lot of stone tools, they don't take the best pictures. For instance, if you look at this picture here, this was one of the better pictures that they took, but it doesn't, depending on the light and where the light is located, it's only going to show, it's not the irises, and which are the edges between flakes, things like that. They're not going to show off very well in pictures. And with illustration, we can show off those irises. We can show off the flake scars and the edge modification very clearly without taking multiple pictures or playing with the sunlight, playing with the light sources, things like that. It allows our archaeologists to take one look at the illustration and get a feel for what's going on and if there's any complexities to the type of flaking patterns in the tool, things like that, right? Or to draw attention to cortex. That's why illustration is so important for this sort of thing. And just an example I can use on my Instagram, I had to learn how to do, I'm a little behind, I had to learn how to do a boomerang, which is like a moving picture that you can upload to Instagram, because I think it was this one. This was, it's not the best, but this is a projectile point that I was working on. I flint-knapped myself, and then when I realized I was taking a picture of it, and it wasn't showing off all the complexities and the different flaking, the flaking methods that I was trying to apply to this. And when I did a boomerang and just kind of shifted it in the light like this, it showed it off much better than a singular picture. And so illustrations is, it's like a boomerang, right? So that's one example there. Another huge thing that I did was, or got into, is debitage, flake illustrations, right? And so I find that getting into lithic illustration, going into debitage first is going to really help you out in the long run. Flakes can be so varied, and there's a lot of different things that you have to have a fine eye and pay attention to when you're illustrating flakes, whether they be smaller, whether they be bigger. There's a lot of thank you. My notes are so pristine. I don't think so. But there's a lot of intricacies that are going on with flakes, or as we call in archaeology, debitage sometimes. But here's thank you. This is much less organized than it looks, trust me. But here, to start with basic illustration, right? I wanted to make sure I started with debitage, just because that's how I got my start. So let me see if I can bring this in a little bit closer. Okay. I'm really understanding the struggles professors were having during COVID. when everything was webcam and through things like this. But basically, to start off, I've got some notes here to make sure I don't forget anything to mention. But there are different kinds of debitage. This, looking from this as an archaeologist, looking at something like this, noting that there's cortex on the dorsal side of this flake, and something to remember there is for flakes, there's the dorsal side and the ventral side. And what I like to think of it, and what I like to teach students, is dorsal side, dorsal fin on a dolphin, let's say. So the back end of the flake. It helps, but, so basically this portion, the ventral side, is going to be closer to the core when that comes off of the flake, when it's flaked off, when a flint napper applies pressure and flakes that off of the larger rock that they might have been working on, right? And so this is the part that came off of it, basically. And then this, the dorsal side, can be very complex. It can have different flakes coming off of it. It could be all cortex, implying that it's extremely early stages of production. This has a healthy amount of cortex on it, so it's an earlier stage of production, but it does have some interesting things going on with it too, given that there's a large flake on this side of it, and then there's little baby flakes coming off of the larger flake. So there's some complexities here, but for the most part, for simplicity's sake, this is an early stage production. It's also a Hertzian cone fracture kind of flake, which is 90% the most common flake type you're going to get, and which is caused by hard hammer percussion. Shoot, I don't have my favorite hard hammer nearby, but basically when you hit I forgot! A coworker gave me this, but basically it's when you take a large cobble like this and you you hit at the core, you hit at the nodule, and you knock a flake off. I've also got an example of that. Oh, there it is. This is my favorite hammerstone. It's not the most practical hammerstone with terrible grammar. Yes, it's true. This isn't the most practical. Typically, you want something that fits within your hand, and no bigger than that. And this is a little bit overpowering. It's kind of Hulk smashing for me, but as you can see, there's a lot of battering on this edge. This is my primary hammerstone that I use. Okay, here we go. So here's another example that I like to show students. So this was something this was a nodule I sourced in Oregon myself, and I battered it. I had to hit it a couple times here, but then hopefully that's, oh, not there. That's not where I hit it. What am I talking about? Here. Yeah, there's that battering. Yeah, I went pretty hard at this, but this is an example of a Hertzian cone fracture. And I can explain why, but yeah. And then here's the other side of it. So these ripples that you're seeing, these are called concentric bands, and they lead towards the point of initial impact. Basically through the percussion, right? Which is the initial point of impact there. Yeah, right. They're also called percussion ripples. I've been taught concentric bands, but yeah, there's a lot of for lithic technologies and for lithic terminologies. There's multiple ways you can call everything: flake, debitage, concentric band, percussion ripples, stuff like that, right? So, but this was really a really pretty obsidian. I was so pissed that I had such a perfect opportunity to use this as a teaching material that I couldn't flake the rest of this and turn it into a tool, but it's really great to have it. It fits perfectly too, so it's really great for teaching people. And then also students are often surprised that obsidian that the cortex of obsidian, and that's this rougher part, this worn down portion, the outer portion of the rock over time, they're surprised that obsidian can look like this when inside, you've got the obsidian. So this is an example. And so basically what you're doing, right? Okay. Is you're taking your hammerstone and you're knocking it off. Basically, that's flintknapping right there. I did it live on camera. And so a lot of archaeological illustrators actually dabble, a lot that I've met, dabble in flintknapping as well. A prime example of that, I wanted to make sure I gave this person a shout out if I ever did something like this on Twitch, but Mudcracked on Instagram is an incredible archaeological illustrator, and I highly recommend checking out his work. He's also an incredible flintnapper. He sells stickers of the designs that he does. He does larger kind of like hasket points and turkey tail, stuff like that, illustrations. They make really good stickers. He does hats. He does like field note book, like he has the design on the cover of a field notebook. No worries, Belle. But yeah, so Mudcracked, I really highly recommend checking out his stuff. And a lot of archaeological illustrators that I know, everybody idolizes his work, so definitely give him a check out if you can. But anyway, so getting into debitage illustration. The first thing to note here is, so now that I've explained the dorsal, for instance, this would be the dorsal, this would be the ventral surface, right? And I can show that on some tougher flakes. That's quite an easy one, right? But the important stuff, I mean, what I find is when you're doing a debitage illustration is really paying attention to that ventral side, and then really identifying if there's multiple flakes going on your dorsal side. So if we're going to start with the ventral, right? One thing to point out is the platform. If it's got a platform visible when you're looking at it straight on, and then coming off of the platform is going to be the point of percussion. That's the initial point of impact where it was hit. The point of percussion, or that percussion flaking, might damage the platform and completely destroy that platform, break it so that it doesn't exist, or fracture it so that there's different intricate flaking going on that platform, depending on how it was hit. And then coming off of that, you're going to get the bulb of percussion, which is basically like a swelling, storing up all that power as you're hitting the flake, right? And then coming off of the bulb of percussion, you might find an aurelier scar, and that's very common in Hertzian cone fractures and hard hammer percussion flakes. I like to tell students that it kind of reminds me of like a peanut. when that kind of that little tiny thing on one side of the peanut, like on the end, falls off. It'll either fall off or it'll stay completely on. A remnant of that aurelier scar will stay on the original core that the flake came off of. But this is something that's telltale of hard hammer percussion. You're not going to find something like this in, say, pressure flaking, which is when instead of using a hard hammer, most often the case, you're gonna have maybe something like this. You know, antler billets, things like this, things that are softer that you're pressing smaller flakes off of, and you're modifying the edges that way. Glad I had that here on my desk. And then immediately coming on, and another important note about the aurelier scar is that it's going to have smaller bands within the scar, and they're going to run perpendicular to the concentric bands or the percussion ripples, as was said in chat. You know, they're going to run perpendicular to that, so that's a telltale sign that it's an aurelier scar and not just some random flake scar. And then also running perpendicular to the ripples are radial fissures, which are signs of weak points in the rock itself. And so one thing that's important to note about radial fissures is that yay, I taught somebody something. That's all I can hope for. But so one thing that's important to note about radial fissures are that for me as a flint napper, right, if I have a flake, a larger flake, I don't have a great example of a larger flake, so I'll just use this guy again. If I had fissures running on the corners here, and like this is a really common thing for obsidian, right? Because it's volcanic glass. It's common with glass, right? If you've got lines, these kind of, usually they're white or translucent lines kind of going through the edges of your flake or of your glass, that's a sign that for me as a flint napper, if I'm wanting to take another flake off of this, you know, to get rid of this cortex and to try to, you know, start working at this and make it into a tool if I can, and a huge portion of that is getting rid of this cortex, right? If I see fissures on the side, I'm thinking that, okay, well, if I take a flake off here, it might crumble. There's a possibility that it might crumble and the flake isn't going to come off as clean, because I'm going against these lines, and they might crumble in these ways, especially depending on how telltale they are and if I can feel them with my thumb. And so it's important to show an illustration if ripples exist within the flake, especially if it's a larger flake, because it explains why the flake wasn't used or utilized, you know, further into the process or made into a stone tool if it exhibits extremely telltale signs of ripples, right? And then some other things I can point out: cortex on the dorsal side, always going to be on the dorsal side of the flake. In illustration, it's typically illustrated through stippling, which is these kind of dots. It can be sort of confusing sometimes because for obsidian like this, it makes sense, right? If I'm going to stipple and it's got all of these kind of, a geology term for it would be like vesicular, or these kind of tiny craters everywhere, right? That are really common on igneous rocks, for instance. That makes sense with the stippling, but then you've got stuff like chert, where some of it is so smooth, and yet this is cortex too, and yet it's so smooth, and I would note this with the same stippling. But anyway, so we use stippling to show cortex in illustrations. And other things to note of this particular dorsal surface on this flake is the flaking that I mentioned earlier that's happening here on the left end of it. And particularly here, where this kind of edge modification, this tiny flake, this micro flake within this larger flake, the lines in between them are called irises. And irises, I think I mentioned before, are the edges between flakes, and really showing how, you know, you have to follow through and show the entire surface of the flake, the entire footprint of the flake, and then everything in between is an iris. And for some things, like for instance here, I even take it a step further and show the depth, try to show the depth of that flake while looking at it head on like this, right? So that's debitage. And now that I've shown this, I've got a really heavy rock on my lap. Okay. Here is hopefully this shows off a little bit more. This is a collection that I did for a site, and I'm not gonna say where, but a site that I worked on, and I was responsible for gathering up. I think the music stopped. Let me get that back up. Let me try to. This was, I think I'm gonna have to do it on my phone. Shoot. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so this was, I was responsible for providing all of the illustration work on this site. Conditions were really rough out there, and archaeologists weren't able to do the illustrations themselves out there, so they took as good of pictures as they could, and I used, primarily, I think what I did is I used Photoshop to make sure I was getting the scaling correctly. And then I actually traced the outline front and back of the artifact via my monitor after I made sure that everything was correct with the scale. And then after that, I took it back, and then I really, really eyeballed it. But that sort of thing, tracing off of a monitor, or sometimes I'll take a picture of something on my phone and then scale it back and try to trace it directly off of my phone. Some people use a light source and try to trace it via the light source. Some people just pop it on there and try to like outline it exactly as it is. I don't like doing that in case it takes off little flakes, but there's a ton of different ways you can get that initial shape of the tool. But I like to trace off of pictures if I can, because it doesn't risk damaging the artifact, and I'll get it more accurately. So I'm just gonna show off all of these if I can. Most of these were obsidian. There's a couple in here that aren't labeled, and I think via the picture I could tell that they were obsidian, but I don't want to go off of my guess on a picture. There's a lot of different minerals out there and rock types that look like obsidian, and I don't want to make that guess. I've worked within flintknapping, I've worked with a ton of different things that operated and appeared like obsidian and were in fact not. But yeah, so here's a flake. Actually, this is not a flake. This is a projectile point fragment. A lot of these were fragments. This is an Elko corner notched. This is a rock spring corner notched. It's a rose gate, which is a type of yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've seen some chert that could look like obsidian as well. Yeah, exactly the point. But yeah, this is a type of arrowhead, and these are all actual scale, like I said. And also too, for instance, this Elko corner notched, right? It's missing the part of the stem, and it's missing the ears, as they call it, the thing coming off of this portion here. But the reason we can tell it's an Elko corner notched is because the notches still remain, and so things like that. And then also some of its context, like this was labeled a Great Basin stemmed. The stem is there, but everything else is gone. So like, or like this is labeled as an Elko corner notched. A lot of reason for this too is just that fine guessing, in that in this collection, a lot of the artifacts that were found, these are all surface level artifacts. A lot of what was found was arrowheads like the Rosegate series. So if it's bigger, and if a lot of what they're finding that's bigger has been Elko points, the archaeologists will make that educated guess that this is an Elko point as well, even though all of the telltale bits and bobs on the bottom are missing. Rosegate again. Rose Spring. Gypsum. They didn't identify this one. Just a bifacially flaked something. Another bifacially flaked tool of some sort, fragment. Northern side notch. Another Rosegate. Rosegate again. Unknown, bifacially flaked. Unknown again. Elko eared. Unknown. Elko corner notched. Notch missing. Sort of. There's a little remnant there. Rosegate. Rosegate. Gypsum. Oh, that was pretty. Elko side notched. Elko cluster. Sierra side notched. Getting into some finished tools here, not fragments. Elko corner notched. That one was my favorite of the collection, I think. Humboldt. Elko. Elko eared. Rosegate. This was mahogany obsidian, and something that I really want to get into eventually is coloring some of these illustrations that I've done over time. If I ever can find the exact pictures of it, because I think coloring it in mahogany obsidian is I think I've got one around here somewhere. Yeah, this is mahogany obsidian. I think that would look so pretty if I colored it. But yeah, Elko corner notch, Rosegate. Rose Spring corner notch, Elko fragment again, and Elko again. So that's some of the work. This is the kinds of stuff that I do. And then, like, of our forms that we had, they're never, especially in our area, they never give more space than this because they figure we're not going to find anything bigger than this box. But in other locations, people are able to find a lot bigger than the box, right? And I've got, let's see. I have another thing around here I wanted to show off, but it has run away. Nope, it's right here, never mind. Here's some other stuff that I've done. It's more of just for fun, not to scale. But this is a turkey tail point. I think these are found in the Ohio River Valley primarily. I just think these points are so very, very cool. I love them. I've never come across one. Well, there won't be any in my neck of the woods, but I've never seen one in a museum or anything like that. They're so pretty though. And then this is a Clovis Point, which is the oldest artifact in the existence of mankind. Don't fight me. It is the oldest. Predates the dinosaurs, in fact. That's what the Clovis firsters believe, right? But going to dive into this a little bit. Oh, and then also, hold on, 1 second. This wouldn't be a presentation or a fun little go along with me sort of thing about lithics if I didn't bring this book to people's attention. This is the Bible essentially for people who do lithic analysis, especially in Washington and the Pacific Northwest. But if you're interested in lithics and lithic analysis and even illustrations, because the illustrations in here are gorgeous. There's that stippling for the Cortex again. Look how, I mean, like, that looks like fulsome. But like this sort of thing, you can see everything so clearly. This book is amazing. If you're interested in lithic analysis, if you're an archaeologist and you don't have this book and you deal in lithics, what are you doing? So this is my Bible basically, and anytime I'm in the lab, I'm never without this. The people who trained me were students of Dendrochronology, so I kind of had to get into him. But something else too. This is not going to be as common of a lithic analysis kind of thing, but I thought it'd be really important to show off. As a person who does flintknapping and as an experimental archaeologist, so to speak, I also tried to learn sort of things that would help me with analyzing edge modification on lithics and things like that, on lithics that I've made and I've altered over time. So one thing that can be done, this was such a fun thing to do, is basically I made a flake. I took a flake off of a core myself. I'm gonna see if I can find that exact one and not cut myself in the process. I think this was the one. So oftentimes, even in just regular lithic analysis and just trying to learn how to illustrate this kind of stuff, I'd make my own flakes and draw them. I don't have any of that with me right now, but that's one way of learning how to do this, especially if you don't have access to a collection or anything like that, right? But what I did is I would flake off I'd flake off a flake myself through flintknapping, and then I would take this flake and then I would apply it to different kinds of materials, scratching it, 50 scratches or swipes through the material over time, and every 50 swipes, including the untouched, before I start the 50 swipes, including the untouched edge, I would illustrate the edge and then watch the changes over time to get a feel for edge modification that isn't due to pressure flaking or anything like that, anything intentional. So for this particular thing, thank you. For this particular thing, I took this larger flake and I applied it to, it looks like wood. I applied it to wood over time. And so this was the dorsal side. And I identified one edge, and then I paid attention to the dorsal side of that edge and then the ventral side of that edge. And this was the initial drawing, the untouched drawing. I should have done it again afterwards, but I was lazy. I was super lazy. But like, so what was interesting over time is for wood, which is of medium hardness, it's not like an antler, bone, or another rock or anything like that. It's medium, right? Over time, I was quickly noticing flakes starting to build up and then starting to kind of layer, which was really interesting to see. And then for antler, I was noticing even more layering, which was really cool. This is just the dorsal side. I've got the ventral side over here for some reason. And then through doing this, I was noticing too that the way I was holding the tool, I was focusing primarily on one edge without even realizing it. I wasn't going straight in or anything like that. I was kind of because it's, you know, this is more convenient to hold, this is easier to hold, it makes sense. And so that sort of stuff you notice through doing, right? You learn through doing, and that's the whole point of experimental archaeology, is to make your own tools, to recreate your own tools, and to utilize the tools in the same way that they would have been used, to get yourself in the headspace of that tool and of that technology that was going on, right? So this one was really fun because this was antler. I applied that one to antler. Should have used the bigger one, but I wasn't thinking. I think it's this guy. Yeah, it's this guy. And then see how just, oh god, like this flake was so messed up. And that's, I mean, this sort of thing would be the result of working off of something that had fissures. You're gonna get stuff like this. It's not going to be a perfect, like, cylindrical looking flake or anything like that. But anyway, I used this on antler, and yeah, it is translucent. It's cool, right? Yeah, I had a bunch of materials laying around, and when I decided to do this experiment, I was like, I could just do regular obsidian, or I could have fun with it and do some mahogany, which is my favorite. It's so gorgeous, and then a lot of it was translucent as well, of the stuff that I had. So yeah, right? Yeah, it's mine too. But yeah, so you can see here on the dorsal side, so I must have been holding it like this as I was scraping back and forth. The dorsal side's got the most edge modification, and there's layering going on, and it's flattening out over time too. Oh, one that was swirled? You gotta send me pictures of that. Yeah, I've primarily worked with obsidian, just regular obsidian, high grain, or mahogany, and then snowflake obsidian, which was something in Eastern Oregon that was quite common, where it had like little white dots everywhere. That stuff was fun to work. But those are the types that I've primarily worked. I've also flint-knapped with petrified wood and with chert as well, because there's so much chert around. I'm running low on obsidian supplies, but chert I've got so much of. I mean, that rock that I showed earlier, I haven't even flint-knapped that yet. But yeah, so one thing that was cool to see over time with this is, if you can see here, it had a protrusion on the edge here, and then over time it got worn down just through use, and that was kind of cool to see. It was kind of like abrasion is where you take a hammerstone or an antler or something like that and run it against the edge to smooth it down and to strengthen something before knocking it off. It was kind of like abrasion, and it was important to see the difference between something that was utilized naturally and then intentional abrasion during the stone tool making process. So that was antler. And then I also did plastic insulation for some reason. I think I was trying to simulate cutting food without actually wasting food. So I used plastic insulation instead. I was thinking about doing that, or just finding like a pumpkin or something, and I was just like, no, I don't want to waste food, I'm just gonna use plastic. So I did that, and there's like no changes. There's like nothing. There's like a little bit going on over here, but I mean, nothing to cause little micro flakes or anything like that. And that's what's important to mention, that it's like it's knocking off parts of the edges, but it's not flaking. It's not causing any flakes or anything like that. So that was really cool to see. Yeah, I've got a note here, not much change, no micro flaking. And so that was important for me as an archaeologist to know, that if I'm finding a tool with not that much edge modification going on, and especially if it's found within the context of a house, you know, the foundations of a house pit, a living surface, things like that, then most likely it might have been used on tools, or not tools, food. So that's why experimental archaeology is so important and worth giving a try. For those who really want to understand how stone tools work, how they're applied, things like that, right? Oh, and then that flake, I believe I have that one too. It's one of these. I think it's this one. Even more translucent. Yeah, it's really pretty. Okay. So some of the last things I can kind of show off here are some actual real flakes. Like I said before at the start of all this, do not collect, stay away. Take a picture and contact an archaeologist. But these were used at my prior university as teaching materials for students. And so I got to teach a lot of students with these. But this is some really pretty chert here. This is part of the cortex, and you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at it. It's not very vesicular, like I said before. It doesn't have any of the igneous kind of cratering going on. But when you run your thumb against it, it is a little bit more rougher. And then it's got that discoloration going on too. And so this sort of thing, I would be doing the stippling on the edge there. And then it's got 3 or 4 flakes on the dorsal side. And then you've got this side. And then there's the platform there. And what I like to do a lot of the times too is when I'm trying to determine how to draw a flake and where the top is, where the proximal end and the distal end and all of that, is I thumb it. I try to have a feel for the platform. And so a lot of the times the platform will kind of stick out and there'll be like this lip coming off of it, and I'll just try to thumb and feel where that is. And especially too if it's a material like this and I'm not able to see the rippling as easily as I would on obsidian, right, where like you can see that rippling so easily, and then on this thing it's nothing, right? So like it's there, it's just very difficult to see because this rock is harder. But yeah, so feeling it, and then feeling for the bulb too. The top is right there. Let's see what else I can share. Here's something with, this is not, I don't believe this is obsidian. This might be chalcedony, but it's got some silica in it. The rock will talk to us, it's true. This one has a broken platform, but you can see the concentric bands going in this direction, pointing this way. And then the platform is completely broken off. There's not even much of a bulb, but there is a tiny bulb right there. And then here's the dorsal side. It's got, I believe with this particular flake, if I'm remembering it correctly, this has been heat treated. And the way to tell that is it'll have portions of the rock that are very glossy and then portions of the rock that are more matte. And this has that exhibited on the dorsal end. It's more matte on this side and more glossy on this side, depending on the flakes. Here's another one. Chert. On the ventral surface, feeling for it, and then also you can see the concentric bands there going like that. Yeah, we've got some heat treating up this way. I was part of a flintknapping group as part of the Association for Washington Archaeology, and we wanted to find a property that somebody had to do a little bit of heat treating on stuff for ourselves, and we never got into it because we had like one meeting and then COVID hit, and then we never met again. So it sucked. But someday I'm going to be trying to experiment with heat treatment myself. But yeah, here's another one. There's some platform breakage. This sort of flake would have definitely exhibit an aurelier scar, and I'm not even seeing it. It was cut. The platform was cut so deep into it. And then it's got some interesting things going on the dorsal end. What else? This is a core. A lot of interesting things going on a core. This one has some pot heading, it looks like, so this could have been heat treated as well. As you can kind of see here, this kind of like circular pop. That's another telltale sign of heat treatment. This material, I would not be able to tell you what it is. I have no idea. I've never worked with anything like this before. But here is the dorsal side of it. Here's the ventral side of it. You can see some concentric bands just barely coming off of here. I haven't noticed anything with radial fissures yet. If I see anything, I'll try to point it out. But yeah, typically I throw that stuff out too if it's my own. These, of course, I wouldn't throw out. But I wouldn't call this a bending flake, which is kind of like 75% common, and especially in this region, whereas the Hertzian cone fracture is so very much more common. Bending flakes are something that is a telltale sign of pressure flaking and not hard hammer percussion. And what they do oftentimes is they bend in this way. And on bending flakes, you're not going to find an aurelier scar. And that's, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out the stage of production that it is, that the pressure flaking is going to occur towards the end of tool production, and then the hard hammer percussion is going to happen earlier on, because as you're making a flake, when you're finalizing a flake and you've got a tool and you've got your tool, right, you're going to want to make the edges more fine-tuned so that it's sharp enough to be used as a knife or anything like that, right? So this is a tool that I've made myself. I carry this around with me everywhere. It's so handy, but in order to make it a tool, I had to do pressure flaking all around the edges. I was lazy and I didn't go any further into the tool, and I'm not the best pressure flaker, admittedly. But I had to go all the way around on both sides, just kind of working it, and then I have my tool. And so pressure flaking is one of the last things that a tool maker will be doing. Yeah, sometimes that's all you need to do. Like, a lot of the times too, modern day flint knappers, archaeologists can tell if something has been made in modern times versus before, because a lot of the times they don't, like, the tools that you find in the archaeological record are not going to be the prettiest, whereas the flint knapping that people are doing nowadays, trying to recreate these tools, we're trying to make them look as pretty as possible and eliminate this like open space in the middle here. Ovoids. Yeah, I haven't run across any of these types of things here in like Washington, Oregon. That's really cool. I made this out of convenient and because I knew it would be really easy for me to hold. I think I originally made this because I was helping a friend tan sheep hides, and I thought this would be easy for scraping, and so I originally made this for sheep tanning, sheep hide tanning. And hide working and stuff like that, and now I just use it for everything. It cuts strings. It does everything I need it to. But yeah, so pressure flaking. It's going to be the last thing that people do in the stone tool manufacturing process. Huh. I'm gonna have to look into that. Yeah, I really love I love tools like that. It's my favorite thing I've ever made. In that it's not the prettiest, but it's practical and useful, you know? I've got... Oh, I shouldn't... Good thing. So, I made this one myself. It shouldn't be in here, but I think I stuck it in here because I needed some obsidian examples for class I was teaching. But this was one I made myself. This is a really pretty example of a Hertzian fracture. You've got that initial point of impact, and it's even circular based. If you look up online on Google Hertzian cone fracture, it'll look like this oftentimes, and like for instance, like a bullet hole within glass, it's going to have the same effect, that pressure and all of the kind of power and impact like radiating off of that initial pressure point. And then with the gunshot, because it's so fine, it's going to have that perfect circle too. But yeah, so some obsidian, some cortex on the side, and my intense battering on the edges, which I'm known for. Looks like, I think this would be a chert, but again, I'm doing that feeling. You can probably see it every time I pick up a flake. I'm doing that little feeling on the edges, and then I can figure out where that platform would have been or is really quickly. Hard to see the concentric bands, but this one, oh, it's gonna be so hard to show it. But this one has some fissures on the edges there. If you can kind of see it, you can kind of see it. It's going against the concentric bands. There's some fissures on the edge there. And this would be a bending flake. This would be a pressure flake. Yeah, I'm glad you can see it. Okay, my camera's not the shittiest thing in the world then. But this would be a bending flake. This would be something that would have happened during the pressure flaking process of making this tool. Got a couple more I can show. Okay, there's that lip again. This is another pressure flake. It's got the bulb, but there's no aurelier. There wouldn't be aurelier. There's thought I was seeing some ripples, but I'm not. Yeah, and this again, I don't know what material this would be. I'm not as familiar with this kind of stuff, but it's really pretty and it's so smooth. Hard to see though. It's another little pressure flake, little tiny guy. My supervisor at field school, he was so, oh god, it's not even picking up. He was so obsessed with lithics and with finding debitage. He would, and he had this, he had an accent too. He's from West Virginia, and he had a strong kind of like yeehaw kind of accent. And he would, anytime we'd find something in the field, he would say stuff like, "Woo-wee, we got another Debbie over there." It was just so funny. And I've been calling these like Debbies in my brain the entire time since then. He unfortunately like stuck that to me, but this one shows off the ripples so very well, but it was broken off, probably broken in half, if not more. And this material is really, really cool. And then again, you've got this kind of this dull surface here, this matte surface here, and then you've got the glossy around it. And this is another telltale sign of heat treating. Last two, there's the top, there's the platform. You can see the swelling, the bulb. That's another thing. If you can't feel it, just look for the bulb if it's still around. Interesting discoloration going on the cortex end here. Yeah, so this would be from how I was told, and I'm not the best expert on heat treatment. It's something that I started getting into myself at my last school, and then I was going to do a research project on it, but things got stopped. But yeah, so basically this would have been like the new cortex, and then everything else is glassy, worked from within, right? If that makes sense. This wouldn't have been the original Cortex, but this is the result of the side from heat treatment, from what I understand it. That's my basic knowledge of it. For me, I'm the type of archaeologist that I'll only wrap my brain around something when I do it myself. So I'll only really understand heat treatment when I finally have a heat treatment experiment myself, and I'm so looking forward to actually doing that sometime. But I need to get a couple of my more experienced flint napper friends together and us brainstorming how to do it, because got to find the right property, and then I got to figure out, like, I got to gather some new materials and do all that. But yeah, so there's that one. And then the last one, so this is sort of, I don't know if I would call this a pressure flake, but it's not far. It's not far from that in the production process. And then you've got this lip here, platform here, no aurelier. The bulb is right there. The bands. This is, you know, a typical flake. And so when I'm doing stuff in the lab too, I like to take the ventral sides and then have the platform facing up, and I just lay them all out just very simply. It's something that I got used to doing so much lab work at my last job, and once I do this, then I'll start picking pieces and start illustrating. But yeah, so this is basic stone tool analysis, and it really, I mean, the understanding of that and the understanding of flint napping, things like that, really help for lithic illustrations and stuff like that. But other than that, I don't really know much more I can say. Can show off some other stuff that I've made. Here's something. I don't know what I was doing with that, but I primarily worked one surface and didn't work the other surface. And so the fact that there's so much more flaking going on this side and not the other side, when, you know, within an illustration, showing that sort of thing off is really important. And then you can tell that it's not being bifacially flaked as much. And then a lot of this, you know, it's so important to learn how to illustrate all of these different styles and, right, yeah, kind of like unifacially flaked tools. It's so important to show off all these different styles and understand the differences within different types of stone tools, because you know, the chronology and classification of lithic artifacts can help archaeologists date sites initially and through non-destructive methods. And so a lot of what I do is I look into the typology and the organization of lithic tools so that I can help date a site by doing guesswork on the type of style based on the context of the area and the cultures in the surrounding area, and looking into the archaeological record to see if you know, one style, you know, if a style can be identified, and if that style is linked with a time period that it's generally being found in within the archaeological record of archaeologists working within that area over time. And so a lot of times in CRM in particular, you know, radiocarbon dating is expensive and it's destructive. With radiocarbon dating, you're having to chip off a section of an artifact and send it in to essentially be destroyed for the purpose of trying to date it. And then you've got obsidian hydration dating as well, which does the same exact thing. And so that becomes, you know, it's destructive, it's expensive, it's timely. And so in CRM, we try to primarily, especially if we're looking at surface level artifacts that we don't collect a lot of the times, or if we're dealing with a really tiny site, or, you know, whatever the case may be, if we're just doing shovel testing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's only useful for obsidian, right? But yeah, so we'll look at a style of tool, let's say this guy that I've made. That's not a particular style. I wasn't eyeballing a particular style or anything. I'm not good enough at flintknapping to recreate particular typologies just yet. But we'll eyeball a particular style. Let's say that this is a desert side notch. There's no notches here, but you know, if this was a desert side notch, then we know that, you know, this was made by a particular culture, and that this is found within this particular time period, found within this particular set of, you know, stratigraphic layer, usually over time. And so just by that, we can date a site that way. And then there's other methods too for dating. There's dendrochronology if you're in an area that exhibits that sort of thing. And like I said, radiocarbon dating and obsidian hydration. But through just chronology and classification of stone tools, you can learn so much about a site. And that's why I really love this kind of stuff. There's so much that you can learn from these tools. Their uses depending on the context of what they're found beside, like if they're found beside bones or anything like that, or depending on the type of bones, or if they're found on a living surface, or if they're found nearby a lithic scatter and maybe were never used, you know, all these sorts of things. The context can really tell you a lot about the tool. And then looking at the edge modification going on the edges, if there's any residue, blood residue or anything like that on the tool. And then the typology, you know, telling you so much about the chronology at you know, in place at the site. What's the oldest point type that you've identified in the field? Oh, definitely, God, I'm blanking on it. I'm a bit tired. Oldest type. I think, if I'm not gonna go for a joke answer, Hasket. I think a Hasket point has been the oldest I've ever identified in the field. There might have been something older, but I can't place it. That's just in the field. I've also worked on collections with like cascade points and things like that. I've seen wind dust points firsthand. That's been incredibly cool to see and work with at my former school, my former college. But then, you know, Clovis Points, right? Clovis Points, the oldest points and artifact in the history of mankind. Gotta give it to Clovis Points. But yeah, this is what I do, and this is what I like to talk about, and I hope that this was somewhat educational. I just kind of blabbered my way through all of this, but I hope that any of this was helpful. And if I don't like this, I will wipe it from YouTube and redo it. But I wanted to make sure I did a version that if anybody had any questions, or if anybody had anything that they wanted to bring to my attention or anything, they could do that. And then if I do a proper recording later, I can incorporate those questions and things. But yeah, if there's any additional questions, oh, thank you. If there's any additional questions before I end this, please let me know. And like I said, if I decide to do another recording of this, I'll incorporate those questions again and hopefully answer them better when I'm not put on the spot. But this is just something fun I wanted to do. I love this stuff. This is how I got into archaeology. I'm not really interested in bones. I'm not interested in pottery fragments, and I'm not really good at this stuff, I should say, and I'm not really good at historic artifacts either. But for some reason, when I pick up lithics, I can wrap my brain around it a lot more as an art form and as something that I got interested in making myself. And so it all comes a little bit more naturally to me. Yeah, fellow lithic person. But yeah, I think I'll end this. and upload it to YouTube if I feel so inclined to do so. But I'm glad that you learned something, Brian. Because there's a lot you could probably teach me. There's a lot you could probably do with this yourself, actually. You should probably do a lithic demonstration yourself. I'd pay money for that. But yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. I'm glad that you learned something, and yeah, hopefully I can do something like this again, and that I have more experience doing something like this on the spot if I do it again and do like a presentation on petroglyph stuff like I said before, or if we do a draw along, that might be really fun. But yeah, I think I'm gonna end this now, and thank you very much. Oh gosh. Now, I mean, napping is hard at the start, but if you're bored enough and you've got nothing better to do and all you've got is a hammerstone and a couple nodules and you're out in the field waiting for things to move along, it's a fun little side hobby. Of course, be careful about the fallout of flakes, or just do it in your backyard and put a tarp out sort of thing. But it's a fun time waster, and it's jarring at the start, but then when you get more comfortable, it's worth practicing. It's worth doing. Yeah, no making new sites exactly. I have to be really careful about that. I always get the largest tarps possible because I use such a massive Hulk smash kind of hammerstone that I know my flakes are gonna go everywhere. And so I can't count on a smaller tarp catching all of them, so I get the biggest one possible where my flakes aren't even reaching the edge of the tarp. But I really, really recommend that people do that. And when I'm teaching students how to flint knap, I make sure I've got the largest tarp possible, because they're going to be fucking battering it, and the flakes are going to go everywhere. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about flint knapping. Thank you again so very much for sticking around, and I hope everybody learned something, and this will be on YouTube soon, I hope. So I'm gonna end this now. Bye everybody, thank you so much.